Good morning, everybody. We're going to take a minute and let folks get logged in and let into the room. We're very happy you're all here this morning. We'll give it one more minute, but thank you all for being prompt. We appreciate it. Okay, I'll start our introduction so I don't take time away from Jon. Good morning. Happy Monday. Thank you all for joining us this morning. We're always happy to have you at Employment First Topics and Tactics. And my mouse just decided not to work, so that wasn't helpful. Okay, sorry, technical difficulty. Employment First Topics and Tactics is our monthly webinar series designed to equip job seekers, employment professionals, parents, partners, and anyone else who's interested with tools and strategies to move employment first principles forward in Arizona. If you have any sort of technical issues or accessibility issues, please message Sonoran Center in the chat. We want to make sure everyone is able to access all of the content and materials this morning. And before we begin, we always offer a land acknowledgement. The University of Arizona is on the land and territories of Indigenous peoples. Today, Arizona is home to 22 federally recognized tribes, with Tucson being home to the O'odham and the Yaqui. And there are more tribes that don't have the federal designation. We are grateful to be on this land, and we pay our respects to our elders, past and present. We also want to acknowledge that Arizona Vocational Rehabilitation, or VR, funds this monthly webinar series and the Employment First initiative. So thank you, VR, for promoting competitive integrated employment outcomes for all Arizonans. We want to remind you that we do this webinar every month, so hopefully you're registered to join us. We have a lot of great topics coming up. And I have to make two quick housekeeping notes before we get started. First of all, I want to announce, I think you're all aware of this, and I will put the link in the chat after I'm done speaking. But we have a collaborative partnership with Arizona APSE, funded by the Arizona Developmental Disabilities Planning Council. So thank you to Jon and the council. And right now we have an open pilot where folks can complete an application, and we may, if you meet all the eligibility requirements and answer all those questions well, fund you to obtain your certified, no, I'm not saying the words correctly, the Employment Support Professional Credential, CESP, through APSE. So that there's a fee to take that test, and there's a fee to apply to them, and we will cover those fees, but first you have to apply to us and meet our criteria. So we'll put the link to that information in the chat. If you are not a certified CESP, we would love for you to learn more and pursue that. And secondly, the Employment First initiative is actively seeking stories related to self-employment. So if you are an entrepreneur, work with entrepreneurs, known of folks who've been successful or perhaps not, we want to hear about all those experiences. So please reach out to us at Employment First. We'll put our email address in the chat as well. And now I'm going to introduce our speaker. Hopefully I didn't take too long. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce Jon Meyers, the Executive Director of the Arizona Developmental Disabilities Planning Council. We call that the ADDPC because there's a lot of words in there. Jon has been impressively leading the work of the council for the last, I think, 4 or 5 years, Prior to that, he was the executive director at the Arc of Arizona. I have had the great fortune to work with Jon for many, many years while he's been in these roles. He is an incredible policy expert, a disability rights champion, and an amazing convener, bringing people together to address the tough issues that we're often facing. And he always ensures that the work is consistently centered and led by people with disabilities. So all of us here in Arizona, we're lucky to have Jon supporting everything we do through the council. And today he's going to talk to you about supported decision making and how that intersects with employment first. And I want to say really quickly that this topic came from one of you. During a previous session, someone mentioned in the chat that this would be a good topic. So here we are. So Employment First is a community initiative. We do what we do to meet the needs of the community to advance our work. So be in partnership with us and continue to let us know what you need. But now we're going to turn it over to Jon. Thank you for being here today and have fun.
Thank you very much, Gina. You set the bar very high. I hope that I can live up to the expectations you just set. Anyway, it's a great privilege to be with you all today, and make sure I'm situated here. I'm hoping you can all see the screen that I'm sharing. Are we good?
We're good.
Okay, thanks very much. Well, as Gina mentioned, I'm going to be talking with you today about supported decision making, and some of you may already be familiar with this. I see some names on the screen that I've interacted with before in different situations where we were talking about supported decision making. So I think some of you may know quite a bit about this. Some of you may know less. But what I really want to emphasize is that I hope this is the beginning of a conversation about supported decision making. Whether you know a lot or you know very little, I'm hoping that in your professional circles, in your personal circles, this can be a conversation that continues over the course of time and ultimately leads to better understanding of supported decision making and, of course, why it matters in the employment arena, but also why it matters for people with disabilities more broadly, and how it can protect the rights and ensure the self-determination of individuals with disabilities. So I always like to start with a quote from Mahatma Gandhi. We all know who Mahatma Gandhi was. He said, "Individual liberty and interdependence are both essential for life in society." And one of the things that I want to point out, that I really want to emphasize from the outset about supported decision making, in the disability world, we talk about people's independence and wanting to promote independence as much as possible. But the reality is that none of us is truly independent. We are interdependent. We rely upon one another every single day for different things. This world wouldn't exist. The cars we drive wouldn't exist. The buildings we work in and live in wouldn't exist if other people didn't do some work in addition to the work that we do. So we have to recognize that as much as we want to have individual liberty, we also rely upon others. And that is a foundational aspect of supported decision making. It is the reliance upon other individuals to assist and to support that makes it actually a workable concept. I want to also make a distinction between supported decision-making as a concept and decision-making supports. And decision-making supports are what I was talking about just a moment ago, the kind of help that every one of us gets from other people in our lives. We can, in a formal sense, in the disability world, there are these various types of disability or of decision-making supports that can range everywhere from just people making suggestions and people trying to give the benefit of their knowledge to really, legal aspects such as representative payees, the folks who pay the bills on behalf of people with disabilities using their Social Security funds, the legal documents that are associated with powers of attorney, whether they're for financial matters, healthcare matters, or a variety of other circumstances people might encounter. And then there's supported decision making, which is a relatively new concept for a lot of people. and it's relatively misunderstood or not understood in many areas of our country, although the awareness is growing. And that's really what I'm hoping that we all will play a role in as time goes on. We use these types of decision-making supports every single day. They may not be the formal legal types of supports that may apply to people with disabilities or to people who are aging or to various other populations, but on every single day, you and I are using some form of support from other people. We may take advice on what job we should do. That's particularly relevant, I think, for our conversation today. We may be entertaining a job change, and we look to other people, family members, friends, colleagues, who can kind of give us their input, their perspective on that. When we decide where we want to live, we often seek advice and guidance from other people. Even such routine things as what we should have for dinner, we often ask for restaurant recommendations from other people. The list is almost endless of the things that we might seek some form of decision-making support from others. When it comes to these legally recognized decision-making supports, there's a hierarchy in the disability world. And this hierarchy goes from most restrictive to least restrictive. We often talk in the disability world of least restrictive options, least restrictive environments, least restrictive what have you. And it is our goal, typically, to enable people with disabilities, in our case, intellectual and developmental disabilities, but it could be physical disabilities, it could be mental health challenges, it could be other types of disability. In our case, we're trying to promote the greatest independence or the greatest autonomy or the least restrictive options and environments for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Guardianship is the thing that most people are most familiar with, and guardianship is the most restrictive form of support. It's most restrictive because essentially it takes away all of the rights of the individual with a disability. It does not allow that individual to make his or her own decisions, choices. It does not allow that person, except to the extent that the guardian permits it, to determine how they want to live their lives. Now, technically, guardianship is supposed to take into account the wishes of the individual under guardianship, technically known as the ward. But in reality, that often is not the case. Guardians tend to make most, if not all, major decisions on behalf of individuals with disabilities. There is in Arizona and in many other states, although not all states, a step-down version of that, what's known as limited guardianship. Now, limited guardianship is intended to allow more expressed forms of autonomy and expressed forms of decision-making for the individual who is under the guardianship. There again, it often doesn't work that way in practice. In a limited guardianship, there are specific items such as the right to vote or the right to drive or the right to choose where a person wants to live or work that are spelled out in the guardianship agreement, in the guardianship documents that the court issues. That being the case, most other decisions, if not all other decisions, are still in the hands of the guardian. And the guardian can permit the ward to make more decisions for him or herself, but it often doesn't work that way. And limited guardianship is not well known. And it is very rarely applied, even in states like Arizona. Full guardianship, or what's technically known as plenary guardianship, that is far more often applied than limited guardianship, often because people simply don't ask for limited guardianship. They only know about this concept of full guardianship, and that's what they request from the courts. Now, there are other forms of support that can allow a person to still make more decisions for themselves, but provide essential assistance in certain circumstances. Powers of attorney, for example. I mentioned representative payees a moment ago. That's where a person receives the Social Security funds, the SSI funds, on behalf of a person and then pays their bills using those funds. Powers of attorney are legal structures that say that in certain circumstances, an individual will have the right to make decisions on behalf of another person. Powers of attorney don't just apply to people with disabilities, of course. They can apply to any one of us. And perhaps many of us have a power of attorney or multiple powers of attorney in place in case we become incapacitated, in case we, for example, have to go to an emergency room, but we are not able to make decisions for ourselves. We may be unconscious, we may be comatose, there may be other circumstances. So powers of attorney are applicable to the entire population, and they are often applied for people with disabilities because there may be a greater range of circumstances in which that person is incapacitated and unable to speak for himself or for herself. That is a less restrictive form of support, but the least restrictive form, of course, is supported decision-making. Now, I could qualify that and say the least restrictive form of support is simply no support at all. That's allowing an individual or encouraging an individual or forcing an individual to make all of the decisions on their own behalf. It's probably not wise, and it's certainly, as I said earlier, not the way most of us operate. It's probably not the way any of us operate. The least restrictive option is something like supported decision-making. And here I want to clarify some of the language. There is often a tendency to speak of this as supportive decision-making. That is not the case. It is supported decision-making. Supportive decision-making would be where individuals make decisions on behalf of someone with disability in a supportive way, in a way that they believe is in their best interest. Supported decision-making allows the individual to make decisions on their own behalf using the advice and guidance that is provided by other individuals. Supported decision-making can be used by people with IDD, can be used by people with mental health disabilities, can be used by aging individuals, even individuals who perhaps are suffering from some form of dementia, so long as those other safeguards that I mentioned, such as powers of attorney, are in place. And I want to be very clear, when we talk about supported decision-making, we never talk about supported decision-making being used in a vacuum. It should not be used solely of its own accord. It should be used in conjunction with other forms of backup support, taking into account eventualities, taking into account the fact that someone may become incapacitated and unable to speak for themselves. But in most cases, supported decision-making allows the individual to make their own choices, not have their choices made for them.
I don't see
supported decision-making
either, so I don't know.
It can be structured formally or informally. Where laws have been passed to formally recognize supported decision-making, they universally include some form of formal recognition in the form of a supported decision-making agreement, which I'll talk about in just a moment. But the basic structure of supported decision-making is this, and it's pretty straightforward. An individual with a disability wants to make his or her own decisions. So what they do is they form a team of other individuals, people with or without disabilities, who are important in their lives, who perhaps they go to church with, perhaps they go to work with, perhaps they're family members, perhaps they are people they know from recreational activities. They can know them from school. They can know them from a variety of different venues in their lives. But they form a team of individuals who are specifically chosen because of their expertise, because of what they can bring to a support team. And that support team, which can be made up of really any number of individuals, it can be 3 or 5 or 10. You don't want it to get too large because then it becomes unwieldy, but it can be the right number of people to provide the kinds of support that an individual with a disability needs in order to make important decisions in their lives. And it's important to note that those team members really should be chosen for their expertise. They should be chosen because they offer something that the person with the disability feels they might be lacking in their lives, whether that's financial expertise or educational expertise or employment expertise. They don't have to be PhDs. They don't have to have really in-depth knowledge of financial markets. They don't have to have they don't have to be at the highest level of their profession, but they have to be able to help the person to navigate systems and to come to decisions that are reasonable and rational and in that person's best interest. by utilizing the knowledge they have. Really important to note, and I can probably not say this often enough, these support team members are there to offer their guidance, to offer their expertise, to offer their support. They are not there to make decisions on behalf of the individual with the disability. And I can sort of refer to that person as the team captain. They are not there to make decisions on behalf of the team captain. They are there to provide input, to provide perspectives, to help a person understand why making a decision, this decision or that decision would be good or perhaps not so good, what the potential outcomes of making certain decisions are, but they are not there to make the ultimate decision. That is the choice of the person with the disability. And that is why supported decision-making is so important to the self-determination of people with disabilities, because it allows them to make their own choices. It does not give that authority to anyone else, except, as I said, under specific circumstances. Around the world, supported decision-making has been used for years. It is not as, or has not historically been as commonly used in the United States. Texas in 2015 was the first state to pass a law recognizing supported decision-making, even though it's been recognized internationally for a long time. Now, over the past 10 or 11 years, an additional 39 states plus the District of Columbia have passed some form of law that recognizes something either formally titled supported decision-making or similar to it. Tennessee is an example of a state that hasn't passed a supported decision-making law, but has passed a law related to what they call conservatorship. We call it guardianship here in Arizona. They have passed a law related to conservatorship that promotes self-determination and independent decision-making on the part of people with disabilities. It's very, very similar to a supported decision-making law, but it doesn't go quite as far as many others. There are still others pending, and I would venture that before the decade is out, we will probably see some form of supported decision-making legally recognized in every state in the United States. I want to share with you another quote, getting back to this notion of interdependence. Eric Erickson, some of you, if you work in the education arena, the behavioral health arena, you probably know Eric Erickson, whatever you think of him. I love this quote, that life doesn't make any sense without interdependence. We need each other. And the sooner we learn that, the better for us all. And that means that people with disabilities need people without disabilities to help support them, obviously, but people without disabilities need the interaction and the value that comes from interacting with people with disabilities as well. We all need each other. We need each other regardless of our race, our ethnicity, our nationality, whatever the case. The world can only be stronger. And certainly the lives of people with disabilities can only be stronger if we recognize that interdependence. There are three pillars that sort of underpin this notion of supported decision-making. And I've talked about self-determination probably more than I needed to at this point, but those three pillars are self-determination, presumed competence, and dignity of risk. So what do these mean? Well, self-determination in a nutshell means that people should have the right to make decisions about the course of their own lives, how they want to live their lives, to the greatest extent of their capacity to do so. There may be limitations on some people's decision-making. There's no question about that. We know that is the case. For all of us, for each of us, there may be limitations on our ability to make certain decisions. Sometimes our emotions come into play. Sometimes circumstances beyond our control come into play. Regardless of any of those factors, each and every person, disability or no disability, should have the right to make decisions to the greatest extent of their capacity. What is presumed competence? Well, that is the notion that each and every one of us should walk into interactions with people with disabilities, again, in our case, intellectual or developmental disabilities, presuming that person has the ability to make decisions, perhaps many, perhaps a few, but regardless, has the ability to make at least some decisions about the course of their lives, and with the right support, can potentially make many more decisions about the course of their life. And then finally, the dignity of risk. And this is This is something we often don't talk about enough, and that is that each and every one of us should have the right to make choices and make mistakes potentially, but to learn from those mistakes. For most of us, from our earliest years, we're raised being told that we learn the most from our mistakes. We learn more from our mistakes than we make from our, or learn from our successes. I know that was always true when I was playing sports growing up. My coaches would say, well, you learn from, not that they wanted us to make mistakes, but they would say, you learn more from your mistakes than your successes. That is true of everyone. That is certainly true of people with IDD, as much as it is true of anyone else. We deserve the right to take chances, to make mistakes, and to learn from them. That is the dignity of risk. In a supported decision-making environment, in a supported decision-making structure, that's largely why the team exists. Certainly those members are there to provide input on the front end, to help a person understand the potential outcomes of any decision that he or she might make, or any decision he or she is asking for input on. But it's equally important that those team members are there on the back end after a decision has been made. It may be the greatest decision in the world. It may benefit that person's life. He or she may be happy as can be coming out of that decision. But on the flip side, he or she may make a really serious mistake. They may spend money on something they shouldn't spend money on. They may attend some kind of event they shouldn't have attended. They may get involved with people they shouldn't have gotten involved in. It doesn't matter. They have the opportunity to learn from that, and those team members are there as much to help pick them up when they've made mistakes as they are to help celebrate when they've had successes. That freedom to make mistakes is really, really fundamental to supported decision making. We do sometimes have a tendency to take very conflicting points of view when we're raising children with disabilities, when we're serving individuals with disabilities. One is to say that we really want that person to be grounded in the values and the fundamentals that we think are important as parents or as caregivers or as teachers or as employment support professionals. We want them to have a good grounding. And at the same time, we want them to spread their wings and fly. But often we don't find the right balance between those two. We want to keep them safe. We want to bubble wrap them. That's a phrase I'm sure everybody's heard applied to people with disabilities. We often want to bubble wrap them and protect them against the dangers of the world. So in so doing, we often don't allow them to fly, to express themselves to the fullest, to explore what they most want out of their lives. And so we have to find the proper balance. Yes, we have to teach them things that are important. Yes, we have to help protect them if they need protection, but we can't deny them the fullness and richness that comes with a life that includes taking chances, taking risks. So, quick little differentiation of supported decision-making and person-centered planning. This is a gross generalization, and I'm going to admit that because, and I don't mean to mischaracterize person-centered planning, but generally speaking, and we can argue about this if you want, generally speaking, supported decision-making focuses on creating a process for decision-making in a person's life that can involve individual support team members. In many cases, in some cases, it doesn't involve those people, but to the degree the person wants, it involves those individuals helping make choices. On the other hand, person-centered planning tends to focus on setting goals for the person's life and what they want to achieve with their life without necessarily taking into account the decisions that the individual is going to make as part of that. Supported decision-making is about interactions with the broader world rather than necessarily focusing on agencies or providers or specific circumstances. And supported decision-making, it really does cover the entire range of decisions an individual might make, whereas, again, person-centered planning tends to much more focus on the interactions a person has with those agencies that are providing publicly provided supports and services to that individual. Again, gross generalization, but those are sort of, in a general sense, the distinction between the two types of support. Both are essential, both are incredibly important, never more important than they are today, but they are in some ways quite different from one another. So I talked about some of the ways that there are, some of the alternatives there are to guardianship using supported decision-making or as complements to supported decision-making. There's that third-party financial management, the representative payee, could be a trust manager if a person has a trust, could be somebody who is responsible for assisting with an ABLE account, for example. Then there is, of course, support coordination, support coordinators or specified case management. It varies from state to state what things are called. Advanced directives such as do not resuscitate orders or powers of attorney, things like that. And then limited or standby guardianship, limited guardianship in Arizona. But again, that limitation or those limitations that are part of a limited guardianship need to be respected. They need to be adhered to. Otherwise, a limited guardianship is no better than a full or plenary guardianship. So supported decision-making in practice, I've talked about how the individual puts together a team of supporters who help that person make decisions. But what's really important is, again, those supporters are not making the decision on behalf of the individual. They are helping that individual come to a good decision on his or her own behalf. So there's a lot of flexibility. There's a lot of freedom in that for the individual to think about what the consequences of a decision would be, to take into account various perspectives. It maximizes that person's autonomy as a decision maker, but it also has safeguards in place. This is really important for supported decision making as well. For example, in the legislation that passed in Arizona in 2023, it requires that individuals acting as support team members sign a supported decision-making agreement. They have to identify themselves. They have to identify what their role is on the team. They have to certify that they are acting in the best interest of the individual with a disability, and crucially, that they are doing so without any compensation. They're not being paid to be on the team, so they have no financial interest in the decisions that are being made by the individual, and they can be held legally responsible if they do not act in the best interest of the individual, plus they become mandatory reporters. If they notice that someone else on the support team is acting in a way that is contrary to that person's best interest, or if they notice that anyone else in that person's life is acting in a way that is abusive, neglectful, exploitative, any other way that is not in accord with that person's best interest, they are required to report that to the proper authorities. So there are safeguards in place. Maximizing the autonomy, maximizing the decision-making opportunity for the individual, but also ensuring that there are protections so that person does not get taken advantage of. What does it look like? Well, of course, there is the support team. Can be whatever number of people is appropriate for that individual's needs. Again, those individuals should provide the kinds of support and the kinds of knowledge that that person needs in order to make decisions in the areas of life where he or she feels they need additional support. But those individuals are just there to be supporters, to be to provide that input, and again, they have to sign that formal agreement. So they are held to certain standards. They are held responsible for their actions and can be held responsible if they notice the actions of others that would not benefit that individual. This chart, which is far too small, I'm sure, to see on the screen, but these slides will be provided to you if you want. This comes from the Charting the Life course Nexus, and it talks about various ways in which supported decision-making can interact with different areas of life for the individual. It's again, a starting point for conversation about how supported decision-making should be or could be applied in a person's life, and what considerations need to be addressed when applying it, whether in relationships, in eligibility supports, community resources, technology, or personal strengths and assets. And by the way, that last one I mentioned, personal strengths and assets, that is one that is a really, that should be the starting point for conversations about how to put together a supported decision-making team and whether or not supported decision-making is the right option for individuals. I probably should have started with this. I'm not here to advocate for the abolition of guardianship. None of us at ADDPC are advocating for the abolition of guardianship. We recognize that it has a role. There are individuals who require guardianship. But there are far more individuals who do not and who could benefit from an arrangement like supported decision-making that helps them make their own decisions and provides them the necessary and appropriate support to do so. Just some examples of other countries where supported decision-making, or what they typically call co-decision-making, where it occurs and it has worked for years. A number of other English-speaking countries, other countries of Europe, some in South America, Australia. There are various examples around the world. There are even more countries than are on this list that are using some kind of co-decision-making or supported decision-making, and they've been using it at a federal level. There are federal laws in those countries that require this type of structure to be made available to individuals. Of course, here in the United States, our guardianship laws differ from state to state, and there is no federal law requiring uniformity of guardianship laws or uniformity of supported decision-making. So it takes a little bit longer here in the US to get these things passed. And, we still have 10 or so states that need to pass laws to recognize it. But just to reiterate that it's been used around the globe for a long, long time. Where it's working, there are some commonalities, and these are things that have typically been built into US supported decision-making laws. One, it respects the rights of the individual, and it recognizes in the text of the laws that person is voluntarily entering into the agreement. That is true of both the individual with the disability and the supporter. It outlines what that agreement entails. Again, the individual who's serving on the support team within the document needs to specify what their role is, the areas of life in which they are expected to provide support, or if they are expected to just be a generalist, then that can be noted on the form as well. And it's also crucial to note that supported decision-making agreements, even though they are legally required by the legislation in Arizona, they are not legal documents that require any form of lawyer's intervention. They are not filed with courts. They are not like guardianship documents where a judge and attorneys need to be involved. This is a purely personal transaction, basically, between individuals who are agreeing to certain stipulations. And if they don't abide by those stipulations, they can be held responsible. But lawyers and courts do not need to be involved at the outset. They also include those specific protections that I mentioned against abuse, neglect, or exploitation. Our law in Arizona provides a template of a supported decision-making agreement that can be used. And once again, the law requires that people become mandatory reporters. If they notice something that's askew in that person's life, they're required to report that to the proper state agencies. Fundamentally, and this is probably clear to you by now because I do tend to repeat myself, the things that supported decision-making promotes are increased independence on the part of the individual, increased autonomy when it comes to decision-making. They become their own advocates. They become true self-advocates. If they weren't already with supported decision-making, they are definitely advocating for themselves, for their own wishes, their own desires. It also provides a higher degree of safety for individuals, because even though it is popularly believed that a guardianship is the safest, the most protective arrangement for people with disabilities, in fact, with a supported decision-making team, there are more eyes looking out for that individual. And so research has demonstrated that supported decision-making can be a more, say, a safer relationship or a safer structure than simply a full guardianship, because all of those people are looking out for that individual and they are required to report things they notice that are not quite right. We also know there are any number of instances of abuse of guardianships. I mean, some of the more popular ones, the Britney Spears situation was all over the news several years ago. For a long period of time, it was a tremendously abusive use of a guardianship power granted by the state of California. These things happen. I'm not saying they're the norm, but they certainly happen. And when they do, they make the headlines. Supported decision-making can help to remedy that, can help to prevent that from happening in the first place. They also reduce the stigma around people with disability. They make it clear to society as a whole that people with disabilities can make their own decisions. And finally, they provide lots of flexibility because the agreements can be altered, they can be terminated whatever is necessary in an arrangement. If a person can no longer serve as a supporter, perhaps they take a job in a different state, they can be relieved of that responsibility. There's no legal penalty for that. By the same token, if a person is not living up to their obligations, their agreement can be terminated and they can be removed from a decision-making team, and somebody else can be brought in. That can be done at the discretion of either party. And so there's a great deal of flexibility, and people don't get bogged down in all the legalities that go around things like guardianship. Bringing it all around to our get-together today, why does this matter for employment? Well, to me, it's pretty straightforward, and I hope it is to you as well. Supported decision-making really fundamentally, really basically starts with understanding what the person with the disability wants. What do they dream about? What do they desire out of their lives? It is truly an open playing field. And when it comes to employment, it should be that. We should be encouraging people to explore the full range of employment options that interest them. We should encourage them to use creativity in thinking about what kind of employment they want to seek, and to reflect on, what they are capable of, what they are willing to learn. They have to evaluate their existing skills. And by the way, I'm not telling you anything you don't already know, because this is the world you live in every day. We should be encouraging them to think about what they need to know, what they need to learn if necessary in order to pursue the kind of career they want, where the job market is right now for the kinds of things they want to do. There may be jobs that are fading in importance in our economy, but they may be of interest to that person. Perhaps there's some other option available to them. There may be jobs that are growing in our economy that may be of interest to them, and we should encourage them perhaps to move in that direction. We all recognize, again, that there are going to be some limitations. Look, I'm 6'3". I played basketball in high school. I might have wanted to go to the NBA, but there was very little chance that that was going to happen for me. Every one of us may face certain limitations in our lives, and that may be true of people with disabilities. But the reality is we may not be giving people credit for what they're capable of. There are people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, people with Down syndrome and autism and fetal alcohol spectrum disorders, who are incredibly prominent in our society as entertainers, as hip hop artists and actors and rock musicians, as scientists, as coders and software engineers. We should not place predetermined limits on what people can do. We should encourage them to explore their range of options and to use a support team maybe to refine to the things they are most willing to commit to and most willing to put their efforts toward. It also helps, support team can also help in identifying what other forms of external support an individual may need beyond job training or skills development. Can help identify perhaps if somebody else needs to be brought onto a team to support them, or if somebody just needs to be available on an incidental basis to provide input and guidance that the team members perhaps cannot provide on their own. It also, using supported decision-making can expand the potential people have for developing a career. They may start in one place, but grow into something much, much bigger, much more demanding, perhaps, than where they start. As I said, there should be no predetermined limitations, but there should be a refinement process using a supported decision-making team to help them determine where they really want to exert their efforts. It's also true that with a supported decision-making team, the job coach doesn't become the only form of support to help the individual find employment and keep that employment. The members of the team are there to provide assistance as well. Once again, they are brought on because of their expertise, whether it's in helping the person manage a checking account or helping the person get dressed and get to their job on a daily basis, or helping that person make sure they're getting the kind of education and training they need to be successful at a job. A job that those are certainly perhaps parts of a job coach's job or another person's job, somebody formally related to the employment service system, but those team members can be of assistance as well. And then Ultimately, again, it allows the individual to make choices for himself or herself. They might be the right choices. They might be the wrong choices. They might decide to go in a particular direction that just doesn't work out. But the support team members are there to help pick them up and help them redirect if necessary. Identify what didn't work, where it can work better in a different setting, and help them move forward with their lives, perhaps trying something else until they find the thing that is really workable for them, that is really satisfying and fulfilling for them. And those things can evolve. A person, again, can start in one place, but evolve in their career into something entirely different or very similar, but with more responsibility and greater challenge for them. The support team is there to assist with that. So the question I always sort of finish with is, why not try supported decision making? And this is one that we promote to caregivers and parents all the time. Why not try supported decision making before you petition for guardianship? There's nothing in Arizona state law that says you have to petition for guardianship when an individual turns 18 or 22 or 28 or 50 for that matter. Caregivers, parents can apply for or petition for guardianship at any point in an individual's life. So why not give supported decision-making a try before you impose those greater restrictions on the individual? Well, in reality, there are a lot of reasons why supported decision-making hasn't been accepted. Lots of barriers. I mean, first of all, there's such limited experience in our country. The first law only passed about 10 years ago. We don't have a huge body of knowledge showing results of supported decision-making, but I can tell you what we do have shows that it can be very, very effective and can be very enriching for the lives of people with disabilities. There's also the fact that a lot of people don't understand it. When we first submitted supported decision-making legislation to the Arizona legislature back in 2019, back when I was with the ARC of Arizona, people were blown away. They had all kinds of misconceptions about what it involved. And the same is true too often of parents and other caregivers. They don't understand what's involved, and they have misconceptions of what supported decision-making does and how it might potentially harm an individual with a disability. So then there's also the fact that historically in our country, we have granted authority for decision-making to third parties. It is just a reality. And so we have to reverse course. We have to turn that ship around and refocus it on granting decision-making authority to the individual to the greatest extent of their capacity. There are lots of other things as well. Those fears that I talked about, of folks afraid that people are going to get hurt if they're not protected to the greatest degree. There's the fact that it can be time-consuming, and we have to face that reality too. Just as with person-centered planning, when it's done right, it takes time. You really need to understand the individual. The team members have to be willing to commit time to it. The systems that support people have to be willing to commit time to it. And if you're accustomed to, or if your preference is a cookie-cutter approach, supported decision-making is going to blow you away, because that's not at all what it is. It is entirely customized to the individual. There is also the fact that we need to do more outreach. We need to do more advocacy. As much as we've been doing over the past 5 or 6 years, there is vastly more still to do. And we need to reach more communities where there remains a lot of resistance. We need to be educating families, certainly, and individuals. And advocacy organizations, state systems, all need to understand supported decision-making better. But in the private sector, legal professionals, people in the healthcare environment, people in finance and education, and other professions also need to understand that supported decision-making can be and must be respected, that individuals making their own decisions, even if they have cognitive disabilities or other disabilities, need to be respected. The law says so. And whatever their misgivings, whatever their fears, we certainly see this a lot in the healthcare environment. There's a lot of fear about liability. What if somebody who a doctor doesn't believe is capable of making the proper decision makes a decision for himself or herself, and maybe things don't go right? The doctor's afraid of getting sued. Legitimate fear, but we have to help them overcome that. And we have to demonstrate to them that with support teams in place, there is always somebody there to help guide the individual toward an understanding of the decision being made and how it can affect their lives. There are also other, folks in all aspects of life that touch upon people with disabilities. There just remains a lot of resistance or a lot of misunderstanding about supported decision making. So a great deal of education still to do, but that's an opportunity for us. We may think of it as a barrier, but it is an opportunity and one that we are fully committed to meeting over the course of years to come. It is going to require systems change. Getting the legislation passed was just one step. Now we need to change how all of these systems view people with disabilities and their ability to make decisions for themselves. First and foremost, we need to focus on the individual. We need to make sure that supported decision making is the first consideration rather than the last, and that guardianship is the last consideration rather than the first. Again, taking into account the fact that some people are going to need guardianship, and we recognize that, and the factors may be many. But there again, we need to look at the individual circumstances and determine the course of their lives depending upon their personal circumstances. Safeguards are built into supported decision making. We need to educate people on that. We need to make sure they understand that this is not a free-for-all. We are not simply taking people who have intellectual or developmental disabilities and setting them loose in the world and saying, sink or swim. We are assisting them all along the way. And we have to do it together. It takes the entire disability community, or the vast majority of it, understanding supported decision-making and working together to educate others about it in order for us to ultimately be successful and, as I said, to turn that ship around. How do we do it? Well, we continue the education. We continue educating parents and caregivers. We continue educating individuals with disabilities about this option that may be available to them. We educate teachers and lawyers and bankers and doctors and nurses and all of those other areas of life that touch upon people with disabilities. We teach people about what the alternatives are and how those alternatives can complement supported decision-making to increase the safety and the security that goes along with it. Again, we're not setting people loose and saying sink or swim. We are providing other forms of assistance, backup forms of support, so that they are kept as safe as possible. In the employment world, we need to educate people who are seeking employment as well as their caregivers and encourage them to try supported decision-making before they impose guardianship and take away the rights of that individual to determine where he or she wants to work, what kind of career they want to have, how much they want to learn, or where they want to go in order to pursue their career. And then ultimately, we hope there will be an expanded adoption of supported decision-making around the state of Arizona and around the United States. And we will see more and more people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, people who are aging, people who perhaps have mental health disabilities. We will see more people throughout the disability community utilizing supported decision-making, forming their own teams, and ultimately making the decisions they feel are in their best interest and decisions that are based upon what they hope to achieve with their own lives. Here are some resources. Again, these slides will be made available to you. The ARC of Arizona is really the lead agency in Arizona working on this topic along with Disability Rights Arizona, many proponents in other organizations around the state. But I would encourage you to look at the ARC of Arizona's website if you're looking for more information. There are also some national resources that can be made available. The American Bar Association is a strong proponent of supported decision-making and alternatives to guardianship. They have come out with position papers over the years on this topic. And then other chapters of the ARC, including the ARC's national office, who all support this concept and all would like to see it adopted further. So I'm happy to answer any questions. I hope there's time left. If we don't have time today, or if something strikes you later, please don't hesitate to contact me. I'm always happy to talk about it. And if I don't have an answer for you, believe me, as I said earlier, I do not have all the answers, but I can certainly try to put you in touch with people who do, whether at the ARC or within our office or in other organizations around the state. So apologies, I have not been following the chat, but if there are questions that I can answer, I'm happy to do so.
I see that Linda's hand is up and she had the questions in the chat. So I think you can unmute yourself, Linda. If not, we'll do it for you.
Yes, I can. Hi, thank you so much. This was an amazing presentation, really well um, just put together and so easy to explain and wrap your head around. I'm a transition coordinator in a public school setting, and I'm going to ask the question because there's been so much talk about mandating or forcing students to stay if they have more significant disabilities until the age of 22. So I would ask, does supported decision making apply to graduation, right? I sit in a lot of meetings where well-intended adults are making those decisions for students and the student's not at the meeting, or we haven't had a conversation about what the student wants. And from my perspective as a transition coordinator, parents are pushing for this because there hasn't been really effective collaboration between the outside agencies. There's not a clear picture of what's available and what their opportunities are afterwards. And, to me, it's forced institution. That's literally how I look at it. When we all get around and say, you have to stay till you're 22 because you have an intellectual disability, those are individual decisions, and we make them all the time in the district that I work for when they're in the, best interest and the students participating in that meeting. Or sometimes when, we have to make those decisions just because we're getting a bunch of pressure from families and parents. And then we have outside providers, and I'll call out DDD on this sometimes, that are really telling parents, your kid can stay till they're 22. Okay, everybody can stay till they're 22 to try to earn a regular diploma. Is it in their best interest? What do they want? What are their behaviors showing us? How can we have these conversations? And when I finally get in touch with the parents, I find that it's fear because they don't know what's available next. So, I'm going to throw that out there. Does this include the conversation and the choice to graduate on time with my same disabled peers, my non-disabled peers?
Well, I think the short answer is yes, but there's more to it than that. Our attitude is that supported decision-making you can start utilizing supported decision-making really at any point in life. And I'm not meaning to cast aspersions at parents or other caregivers, but one of the realities is that with children with disabilities, we often don't raise them to be decision makers. We don't raise them in the same way we raise children who don't have disabilities. Our expectations are different. And we need to have similar expectations for students with disabilities or children with disabilities as we do for other children. We need to raise them in a way that maximizes their ability to make decisions for themselves. And we need to include them in those settings where decisions are being made about their lives, which includes, of course, the education arena and any conversations around their transition from K-12 into the adult world, whether that's post-secondary education or employment training or something else. So yes, supported decision-making, I would encourage families to start utilizing supported decision-making at the same time that transition planning begins, or even earlier than that, and to make sure, again, that the student is involved in all conversations and is being taught what it means to stay in school until 22, or what it means to leave school at 18 or 19, or whatever is appropriate, and to determine for themselves what makes the most sense. Not, as you said, we're not trying to enforce some form of institutionalization on people. We are trying to identify what is in the best interest of that particular individual. And the support team's role is to help the person identify what's in their own best interest and where they should be going, how they should be charting the course of their own life. So no, there should not be, a blanket policy that all students stay until 22. But for those who need to, absolutely, it should be available to them. It is all up to what the individual needs, and that support team and the parents have to be included in that conversation. And if you're utilizing supported decision making, and again, I would encourage people to start utilizing it, and helping the person make the decision for themselves. I'm not sure if I'm necessarily answering your question.
No, I think
but
you
I
are.
mean,
I would make the
Okay.
recommendation then that you include a few more conversations about that, just what you stated, if I could. The presentation's great, but I think some suggestions on starting that early, and maybe wrapping around the idea of transition, that transition is one place to start that, and giving that information that transition plans should be in the IEP by ninth grade, and students are invited and they should be attending. I mean, that's one way to start exhibiting that or giving them that in a really secure way. We get to the end of the road here, and it's I don't want to say it's too late, but it's just a little bit harder. So no, I agree with you on all those points. I just wonder if you could incorporate that. all of our agencies need to start working together a little bit more. And so if there's a way to include the concept and idea around transition planning and the offer and the opportunity that it gives them in a really safe, structured, supported environment, but that also leads us to having, and you said it, it's an individual decision. So I guess I'm worried a little bit about where the division stands and policies that are trying to be pushed forward that require institutionalization basically until you're 22. And so how can we wrap this supported decision making concept and idea into the concept and idea of transition, because self-determination and self-advocacy is one of the things that are included in the transition process, or should be. And so I think you make excellent points for why all of that needs to happen early for them and how we can start practicing it in that supported, safe situation. So, man, I would just love to partner with you on that, or look at how you could include, some concepts around that where you can start putting pressure on schools to think about that, to do that, and to not allow, parents oftentimes will excuse their kids from the meetings. Oh, they just get bored. Why? This meeting is about them. Why have we not created this meeting in such a way that the student is contributing, that we're inquiring about those decisions? They shouldn't get bored, and I need another platform, I'm sure, and I'll get off my soapbox here on my chair. And I know that you believe the same as I do, John. I've been to many conversations as you, and our conferences and presentations, and I know we're all on the same page. But it is a big concern I have in public education right now. I want to give families and students choices. I want to give them the opportunities to achieve things at the same. And the reason that they want to stay longer is they fear what's after, and they shouldn't. And if we were working together better, identifying what those needs would look like, have more opportunities to experience things, then I just don't. I think parents and students, families could make this decision together, confidently. And I love your dignity of risk too. There's a great video out there about that, but I'll let you go. Man, I could talk to you forever. There's other people with their hands up, so I'll stop. Thank you.
Okay. We should talk more though. Feel free to be in touch. Any other questions or thoughts? By the way, I should say, sorry, Nicole, one second. I should say that I am open to contrary points of view. I would love to have discussions, and I understand that there are a great many concerns when it comes to individuals with IDD in particular making decisions for themselves. So I would love to have a conversation. If anybody feels differently about any of the information that I shared, feel free to get in touch, and I'm open to learning things. Sorry, Nicole.
No, you're fine. I appreciate it. I'm a big fan of yours and supported decision making as a parent of almost 15-year-old now with multiple disabilities and working in the field. And now in my role, I know I'm working with offering families all of their options, right? Allowing them to make informed decisions. And one of the things that we stumble across is that aligned messaging. And I think you've spoken to that before too, right? How can our agencies and our organizations have that aligned messaging? And Michael Leva brought up a good point. Like he says, I agree with Linda Rudd about including supported decision-making in the IEP by 9th grade, which would be amazing. But one, not all students are public school students, right? And I think that's a great thought, but to have that aligned messaging, right? Of, can we ask VR, DDD, schools, the Centers for Independent Living, right, to have the same resources and attempt, right, in a perfect world, attempt to share those around the same time. I would rather a family get inundated in the same year with the same resource from multiple different places than we expect the school to do it, and maybe the school didn't do it for whatever reason. Or they did do it, but it wasn't done well. Or it was done well, but the family didn't receive it, right? There's so many, when it's just one person at one point in time. And I know that as a family, if you talked to me about supported decision making 10 years ago, I would have said, not my kid. And then yet I took your course when she was 10, right? So I wonder if there's any efforts or thoughts or conversations around that. And here at Encircle Families and with our pilot project coming up, we would be happy to support you in any effort with that, especially we'll have 25 captive families. We're happy to make them a focus group if we need to.
I agree with that, Nicole, heavily. I put a message in there. Is the member required to be included at DDD meetings starting at age 14? Right. I do think there are things that we can look at, whether or not we can change the whole vernacular of all of our agencies and entities. I don't know, but we can change our actions, right? If we have to have them starting by the end of their 9th grade, which is usually 14 to 15 years of age, then they should be a DDD members meeting. They should be at those meetings. And then we also need to work with VR. We have a TSW contract, so that's not the case for us, but there's only 30 of those across the state. So when VR says services can start at 14, they need to. They need to stop saying we're going to wait until graduation. And they do that a lot. And we get kids that come into our district. I'll find out that they've got a VR counselor. And when I get on the call, oh yeah, we told them we're going to start when they graduate. But public schools do have a lot to offer in the area of transition planning. We have career technical education. We have all the services right at your fingertip. Why would we wait? Why would we not be all working together and then influence the goals and activities and the courses that these young students or youth have available to? And so yeah, I'm retiring from the school district, or I've retired and I came back part-time. So I don't worry about burning any bridges anymore. Mr. Myers, you might hear from me a little bit more. I don't have any bridges I have to walk anymore, except the ones of my own devise. So, I really do appreciate your work, but I am very, very concerned, and it's going far. The talks are going far, and I want people to view it for what it is, which is mandatory institutionalization. That's what it is. If you say they have to stay until they're 22. Every person in the United States is allowed to stay up until the age of 22 for the purpose of trying to earn a regular high school diploma. The only advantage for a person with a disability is, in Arizona at least, they get to stay until the end of the school year. But if I were 16 years old, I didn't have an IEP, dropped out for whatever reason, and came knocking on my high school's door at age 20 and said, I want to earn my diploma, they would have to let me in. So that's a misconception as well. IDA doesn't allow you something more or different. It allows you the supplementary aids and services you need to try to earn the same milestones, those same opportunities. And so I don't know how to do it. I'm willing to show up wherever you tell me to go, to try to get this messaging across. I've tried to interact on several different occasions with members that are really pushing that ideology, and just don't really get I've invited them to see programs I have that look at how we try to prepare our kids. And if they're not ready, they're not ready. And sometimes their families aren't ready. And I am totally sympathetic to that. And we as a school need to do what we need to do. But then, in my opinion, if parents aren't ready, if we don't have that cutoff time to some extent, that kind of goal, I'm not going to call it a cutoff time. I'm going to call it a goal, a reasonable goal. Then what I find is, this is what I think will happen with schools. They'll just delay it. And I have experience of this in other states. I'm on a national community practice for occupational therapy in transition, because I'm an OT by trade. And so if you want to call up to Connecticut, we don't start any of these programs until 18. So, that's the other potential disadvantage. They'll be like, oh, well, they're staying here for 4 more years anyways. We don't need to start. And so we don't do anything, and parents don't do anything. And, so I'm not saying schools are good at this, and I'm not saying some of the things they say about some schools are not correct. And they're not good at having these conversations, but part of it is we don't have the partnerships. We can help students set post-secondary goals, but it's the DDD and VR of the worlds that help the students meet them. And so if they can't come to the table and tell us what they can offer and how they're going to be there for that member or that client after they graduate to follow through on these goals, then we're just setting them, and we feel very fearful. That's how a lot of, schools feel. I don't have a problem with it, but a lot of, schools and these are teachers. They're not experts in transition. They're experts in public ed. So this
Linda, you should really reach out to me. Let's talk more about this, and
Okay.
that's all. A lot of what Employment First talks about is bringing systems together. And I love everything you're saying about ensuring that folks are participating in their meetings, and not just that they're sitting at the table, but that they have access and understand what's happening, and they're contributing in the conversation. We still have a long way to go. So This has been awesome.
But we can get
This
there
is
faster
awesome.
together. What do they say? If you
Yeah,
want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And so
yeah,
I think,
yeah.
involving the schools in those conversations, or people that have been working towards what you're saying. I think there are a lot of us out there that are doing it. So thank you so much. Sorry, go on
Absolutely. No,
forever.
you're good. You're
John
good.
committed an
And
hour. I'll
on the
reach out.
topic of schools and transition planning, just for those of you still with us to know, our next topics and tactics on March 9th, we're going to have Nellie Sanchez and Melissa Wojcik from Department of Ed talking about the secondary transition journey and prioritizing competitive integrated employment through
Good.
that process. So we get to kind of carry on. And I know John is amazing. Thank you, John. Always
You are.
open for
Absolutely.
folks to reach out, and as am I, to continue all of these discussions. And I want to ask you all to please complete the survey that's going to pop up when you exit the Zoom. We get
Okay.
very low response rate to our surveys, so
Okay.
complete the survey. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Does
Thank you.
anyone have anything else? Okay. Have a great week. Do good things, people. We're making progress. We're going to keep at it.
Thank you very much.
Bye. Thank you so much, John.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Linda. That was awesome. I love all
Thank
the
you.
perspective.